Assalamu alaikum. Those of you who were here last time, I think they can recall like few things about the language. Can any one of you like remind me of some of the things that we said about the language? Why it's like so special? Why Arabic? Anyone? Yes, please.
Literal meanings, is like the meaning literally is like science to back it up. It's just literally.
Okay. Any other like points that I made last time about like the linguistic features of the language when we were talking about some verses in Quran and how they are so exact when they are explaining the meaning of when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is making a simile, so it becomes closer to our minds. Do you remember any of the verses that I mentioned last time? Those of you who know Arabic or even who don't.
I can't remember Arabic. You mentioned the verse where the light, you get stopped by the atmosphere, then the sea, then deeper in the sea.
Yeah, so the clouds and then the waves and like two types of waves.
And also it's like the people that in the Quran, the heart feels like the
ومن يرد أن يضله يجعل صدره ضيقا حرجا كأنما يصعد في السماء. So when you go up and the level of oxygen it drops down. Any other points that you remember? Okay, so today I'm going to go from the very beginning. Sometimes English language, how did a language, start? How did English language start? Some people came together and then they make a language and then this whole system of the language, how come they come with the meanings or agree on something? So Arabic, how did Arabic start? Some people think Quran came with the language, like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed the Quran to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, and then people knew the language through Quran. Do you think so? Who believes that? Who believes that Quran is the beginning of the language? Don't be shy. Who believes that? Do you think that the Arabic language started when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed the message of Islam with the holy book of Quran to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam? Is this the beginning of Arabic language? So where did it come from? Where did the Arabic language came from? How the system of the language developed? Those of you who study linguistics, aside if they study Spanish or English linguistics, and then they are going to go to the Indo-European languages, and they say, okay, this word came to English from Latin, and this word it came from the French or the old Germanic language. So always there is a root. Modern languages that we have right now, this is not the same shape or form of the language as they used to be 1,000 years ago. So Arabic, this system, you write the opposite way. You write from right to left, not from left to right. And you connect the letters. And you have this system of vowel sounds that would change the whole meaning of a word just by these fatha or dhamma or kasra or sukoon. How come we have this system? Is there any other languages that share the same root with Arabic? And what are they? Do they still exist? How many people speak these languages? So, to start with, when we look at linguistics, one of the categories, Indo-European languages, and then you have French, Spanish, English, and all European languages, we have something like this called Afro-Asiatic languages. This division, under it, another division which we call Have you ever heard of this word? Semitic languages? Arabic is one of these languages. So, Semitic languages, they are a group of languages. They originated in the Near East. The people who represent this geographical area are the people who live in the Middle East or North Africa. So thousands of years ago, there were like people living there, and there was the big category, and then under it came the Semitic languages. And Arabic was one of this family, the Semitic languages. But in the old shape and form of Arabic language, it wasn't as we see today. What we see today, the way we write it, the way we pronounce it, this is the classic Arabic. This is the language, let's say, 2,000 years ago. And we have the modern standard Arabic, the language that everyone, talks in the middle, and they have like different dialects. So if you have like an Egyptian friend, a Moroccan friend, they are speaking the modern Arabic, but they are not speaking the standard Arabic. They are not speaking the standard Arabic. And what I mean by like dialects and standard is like, let's say, in English, the word ma or miyah in Arabic. In English, how do we say it? Water. This is a British accent. Water. American would say water. The dictionary would say water. So this is the standard. To pronounce it as the dictionary, the linguistic pronunciation, the dictionary says you pronounce it like this. So this is the standard language, and this is the language of Quran. But other people would have different people from different countries, they have different dialects. So they pronounce it differently. But Quran, it set the standards for the language, for the Arabic, the standard Arabic language. And then people started to have their own dialects based on the geographical area that they lived in. Okay? If we look at this, we see that from these Semitic languages, Arabic came from the central, so we have the southern and the central, and Arabic and Hebrew, they are from the same category. But the Hebrew that people have nowadays is not the same as it was back then. Not much of the system kept like it was before. But Arabic, Quran played a major role preserving the language. Because the thing is that even when people changes some of the meanings, and they brought up some new words, and they brought some words from other languages, everyone from different countries, they know the standard language. Because Quran, it's like qamus, it's like mu'jam, it's like the dictionary for the language. So I say I pronounce it that way, and you say I pronounce it that way, and I say no, but Quran says it that way, so this is the standard. Because nothing is more standard than the language of Quran. And when I say standard, I do not mean complicated. Because some people would say, when I say fusha, when I say lugha Arabiya, fusha, the fusha, the lugha, the dictionary, people think it's big words that people don't understand. No, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent the message of Islam with the book of Quran to people, the challenge was not to bring words that they do not know. No, it's to make it simple. And the complexity of it lies within its simplicity. And here is the challenge. It is simple but yet complex. If you look at, I mean, it's not like clear for you, but this map, it shows that the Arabic language has like these different borders. So that like the border, like the red one, it represents the central Semitic languages, which Arabic is part of. And then the southern one, the blue one, and the green one is the eastern part of it. They say Arabic languages because, as I said, in the very old scripts of the language, it wasn't the same like what we see today. The system developed. The system developed. The way people write developed. The Arabic calligraphy, it changed. People from different tribes and clans, they started to have like, a specific way of expressing things. Like some poets, they invented new words in the language to be able to describe all the things around them. So let's say, for example, why in Arabic you would find so many names for like the word line or desert? Why? Because they lived in the desert. So they started to have different words to describe different things. But when people started to travel around the world, they started to see new things. And then they had to develop the language. They had to add things to the language. But when they start to do this, they don't just come up with words that have nothing to do with like any other word. No. They look at the roots, and this point we are going to come to. Like how the root system works in Arabic. How does it work? Why Arabic is so like distinctive when it comes to this root thing? We have a root and then we start to develop everything around this root. So it said that Arabic languages are central Semitic languages, most closely related to Hebrew, Aramaic. You know these languages, the holy scriptures like the Torah and like the Gospel and like some of the holy scriptures, they were like written in Aramaic. If you like watch like the any documentaries when they start to talk about like religion, sometimes they use these old languages because they were written and translated from like these old languages till they came like into English or Spanish or like the languages that we have today. But Hebrew, Aramaic, and Arabic, they came from the same family. They came from the same family. And even if you go like so deep in linguistics, you would find that they have some words in common, and even the pronunciation. So sometimes if you listen to some people who are like speaking these languages, you think they're like speaking Arabic because they share the same root. Root system. جذر. في اللغة العربية the word root we say جذر. And جذر can mean a root of a word like its origin, or a جذر as a root of a tree. Arabic language, it's all about these three letters. Fa, Ayn, and Lam. Fa, Ayn, and Lam. Fa, A, La. These three letters, they are like a scale. They are like a scale. So, any Arabic word that you know, we can take all the additional letters that exist in the word and we bring it back to three letters. And the scale is fa'ala. So for example, when we say alim, this is a word that you would know even if you don't know Arabic. Alim, well, what is the meaning of alim? What is the meaning? A scholar. Someone who knows ilm, who have knowledge. So alim, how many letters are in this word? Alim, 4. It comes from the root alima. Ain, lam, mim. So fa'ala, this is a scale. They are not like actual letters. No, they exist in Arabic as actual letters, but we have fa'ala and then we have alima. So when I say fa'il kalima, the fa of the word, it means the first letter of it. When I say aynil kalima, it means the second letter. When I say lamul kalima, it means the third letter of the word. So when I have the verb alima, this is the root of alim. And we have a system that says, if we have the verb alima or kataba or darasa, and then we just add alif after the first letter of it, then it brings to us ismul fa'il, the name of the subject, the name of the person who does this act. So the one who has ilm, we call him alim. So if we have kataba, the one who writes, we call him katib. If we have darasa, a student, we can call him daris, because he studies, and so on and so on. So this is what I mean by a root. And it doesn't stop like this. It is fantastic. If you examine it, and you see, because, one of you will like stand up and say, okay, what's the big deal? I mean, like in English, I say he writes, and I say a writer, the one who writes. So we have the ER system, which equals the alif that you have in Arabic. I mean, we have it in English, and like different languages have the same thing, but it doesn't stop like this. It doesn't stop like this. So fa'ala, this is a big thing in the language. And we're going to know more about it. Active and passive. And for those who do not know what active and passive means, when you say in English, I read a book and the book was read. I read a book, this is active. It means you know the subject. Who read the book? I. And when you say the book was read, it means someone read it, we don't know him. So this is passive. In Arabic language, we call it al-mabni lil-ma'loom wal-mabni lil-majhool. Al-mabni lil-ma'loom wal-mabni lil-majhool. The word mabni means built. Ma'loom means known. And majhool means unknown. So when I say mabni lil-ma'loom, it's built for the known, so this is active. I know who did the action. Al-mabni lil-majhool, this is passive. I do not know who did the action. In English, and I'm still talking about using the root and then applying the rule. In English, we say, I wrote a book. The book was written. In Arabic, was written, we just change, we use the root. So, kataba, he wrote. It was written, this whole sentence, the same 3 letters, kataba, but then we are going to change the short vowels. I don't like to call them like English names because they are different. There's nothing called short vowels in Arabic. We have tashkil, fatha, dhamma, kasra. So kataba, it's all fatha. If I make it kutiba, I change the first letter and put dhamma, I make it ku, and the second letter and put kasra and make it ti. Kutiba, it means it was written. And then this applies to all the verbs that are 3 letters like this. So it was written. So you can, one word, you can make it mabni lil-ma'loom or mabni lil-majhool. You just change few things. Kataba, kutiba. When we pray Maghrib. What is the meaning of Maghrib? We say we pray Maghrib. Inshallah, we're going after this, we're going to pray Maghrib. Why it's called Maghrib? You know, why it's called Maghrib? Because of غروب. لأن الشمس تغرب. Because the sun goes down. In Arabic, we have names for time. So because the sun goes down at time of Maghrib, the prayer is called Maghrib. So the time we can give it a name according to the action that happened in the time. So there is a system. So we have the root, and then we can make it active, we can make it passive, we can make it a name of a subject, a name of an object, a name of a place even. We have something called Ismul Makan, a name of a place. So in Arabic, where do we pray? In masjid. Christians, where do they pray? In a church. Speaking of English, church. What do you understand? Let's have it alone and say a church. Where does the name come from? A church. Do you know any verb in English that would come closer to the word church? That you can say this name is related to this verb? No, just a name. But in Arabic, we call it masjid because we have something called Ismul Makan. Because we do what? We do sujood. So, sajada, he made sujood, sajada. So that's why we call a masjid. So if you have the root, sajada, the fa'ala, then you can come up with the name of the place where the action is done. Let's follow this. Kataba. What is the meaning of kataba? He wrote. You write in like your office. So what do we say about an office in Arabic? What do we call it? Maktab. Sajada masjid, kataba maktab. We play. La'iba. The playground is mal'ab. So there is a system. If you have the root, you can come up with the name of a place, the name of the time, the name of the person who does the action, the name of the person whom the action is done to, and so on. And this is what sets it apart from other languages. It makes sense. It does make sense. You have the root, and then you can start making words. Just what you have to do, you have to have the scale, the jidr. You have to have the scale. So you know what letters you add to make it a name of a place, what letters you add to make it a name of a time, what letters to add to make it passive, what letters to add to make it a name of a subject, what letters to add to make it a name of an object. It's not just about the letters, it's also about the vowels. Because the vowels, they change the meaning. As we said, kataba, kutiba, daraba, duriba, and so on. And this is what I mean by tashkeel. The fatha and the dhamma and the kasra. The fatha and the dhamma and the kasra that we have in the language. Fatha, dhamma, kasra, and sukoon. If you don't know the language, then you better be quiet. You better be quiet. Why? I was watching a video for someone from Germany. He's a scholar. He is a scholar. And he was researching the language, trying to prove that Quran is not one book as we think. They envy us. Other people, like people of the book, they have many versions. and each one believes their version, is the right one. But for us as Muslims, when you travel to other country and you have Quran, do you find it different? It is the same, because it was written and revealed and preserved in the same language. Even people who translate the language, they say translation of the meaning of Quran. Translation of the meanings of Quran. They do not say translation of Quran, because you cannot translate the language. So this so-called scholar, he said, I am going to prove that it's not one book, and then he studied the language, and then he traveled and he tried to get some of the old writings of Arabic for Mus'haf Sayyida Aisha, because the wives of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, when al-Wahy, when Jibreel radiallahu anhu used to come to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam and give him Quran, the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, when he goes back to his wives and his companions, he starts to recite Quran for them. So they started to write it down. But at the beginning, Arabs, they didn't use to put dots. So in Arabic we have fa and qaf. Some letters you'd find some little dots above or below, and this changes the word. This, one dot would make a difference, because it's going to change the letter, and consequently the whole word is going to be different. So when he found out this point, he said, okay, this is one. At the beginning, they didn't have this system of putting dots. And he saw that they even wrote without putting tashkil, without putting fatha and dhamma and kasra. And because he studied Arabic linguistics, he said, okay, and this is another point. Fatha and dhamma and kasra, it's going to change the meaning. So that means the Quran that they have today, because it was written and there was no dhamma and no fatha and there was no dots, then it can have so many different versions. And then he thought that he came up with the things that Arab linguists didn't pay attention to. And he used this to prove that no, it's not one version, I can read it differently. But he wasn't able to provide another version. Okay, you say this, okay, you have the Quran without the dots, without fatha and dhamma and kasra, give us another version. It's ready for you, give us another version. By the end of the research, it's a matter of putting fatha and kasra. But then, he wasn't able to provide, and he will never be. Do you remember the verse that I said when kuffar, they said to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, أَمْ يَقُولُونَ افْتَرَى, they said, he made it up. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told him, قُلْ فَأْتُوا بِسُورَةٍ مِّن مِثْلِهِ, then come up, make up one surah, وَادْعُوا مَنِ اسْتَطَعْتُم مِّن دُونِ اللَّهِ إِن كُنتُمْ صَادِقِينَ, and gather everyone, all whom you can gather, to make one surah. Because to say it's easy, but put it into practice. The thing that this guy did not understand, even if he studied the language for centuries, because he is not studying it to study it, he's studying it to prove a point. So the results are already put before he started the research. The point that he didn't catch is that we have a siyaq, the context. So, if I use the word passive, then there is no way that I can mention the subject after it. If I change the tashkil and make it kataba, and he is going to provide us with the other version, kutiba, so there is a whole different meaning. No, if you do this, we're going to understand it's not right. Because if you make it passive, then you cannot mention the subject. So there is no way, even if I am reading the language and there are no dots and there are no tashkil, I still can read it the right way. And if he just made a little research, and tried to read some new Arabic literature, and it has no tashkil, who would understand that native speakers, they read the language without tashkil. Because they understand how to read it. They know if there is a subject, then it's going to be mabni lil ma'loom. Then it's going to be kataba. And if there is not, it's going to be kutiba, and so on. So, if you do not know the language, you be quiet about it. And when you research it, before you publish your research and go online and try to talk about it, try to consult with someone who knows the language. Because people would just go and say, yes, he made a point. Yes, I know he made a point. That's because you don't know the language. Yeah, he made a point. Yeah, it can change. And then they go online and say, yes, does it make a difference? Yes, it makes a difference. This person is brilliant. You know, just with a little research, he destroyed the language that had been like for thousands and thousands of years. And what makes you sad is that then you will have some native speakers trying to argue the same point. That a native speaker, being a native speaker of the language, does not qualify you to talk about the language. You have to understand it. It's not being a native speaker. Non-native speakers can have a knowledge of the language more than the native speakers if they study it well. For example, like talking about the root. You see this word? It is so big. Now, how many letters? Fa and alif and sin and qaf and ya and noon and alif and kaf and mim and waw and ha. And you told us that it's just about the root and this is what makes it different. Yes, it is about the root. This whole word, it's in Quran. فَأَسْقَيْنَاكُمُوهُ. If we look at it, the root of this word is sin and qaf and alif. Saqa. This is the root of the word. Saqa. And then from this root we made a complex sentence in one word. And this is the beauty of the language. So fa, the letter that we started with, this is, we call fa al-ta'qib. So if you are telling a story in Arabic, then you use fa to say then to put actions in order. So it starts with fa, and then the alif after it. It means I did the action. So kataba, when I say I write, I say aktub. So I put alif. So this is then I, the first two letters. And then here we have the root. The sin and qaf and ya. And this is a long story. What it was alif and then it became ya. But this is the root of the verb. So the first two letters, this is then and this is I. And this is sa, qa. And then we have na. فَأَسْقَيْنَا. And this is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talking about himself. Na here, we call it, it's a damir, it's a pronoun for we. We. So, asqa, afwan, this is the verb in the past. Asqa. And then we. This is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is not for plurality. This is the royal we. So, we. ما معنى سقى? Do you know what is the meaning of the verb سقى? To give someone a drink. To give someone a drink. سقى. And then فأسقينا we. And then أسقيناكم. The kaf and mim. This is a pronoun for object. So, we and kum, what does it mean? You, plural. So, we gave you this drink. فَأَسْقَيْنَاكُمْ. Ma'akum. And then we have the ha referring to the drink. So we have then, and we have the verb, and then we have a subject, and then we have a first object, the people whom the drink is given to, and then a second object, the drink itself, in one word. In one word. It makes a complex sentence. One word. It is very complex, but if you study the system, then you would be able to add the fa, and then you would be able to add na, or if it's you, if it's I, if it's he, if it's she, you know what pronoun to use for this, and then you know what pronoun to use for the first object and for the second object. And this is what I mean by the root system in the language. The root system in the language. And this can apply to any verb in the language. To any verb in the language. You know the rule? You know, they say Arabic it's very hard and complex. No, it is not. It is not. When, I started to learn English, it didn't make sense to me. It didn't, because I was used to a system. So, and I was trying to produce the same thing. I was trying to make relation. So, the first time I heard the word like a church, I thought it has something to do with the verb to cherish someone. I'm trying to make sense of the language. I'm trying to put things together, but it didn't make sense to me. Words like, a library. What does it have to do with to write? A library in Arabic, it's a maktaba, a name of a place, because this is the place where the written things are put. So I was expecting the same. I was expecting the word library, so maybe the verb liberate would mean to write. I was expecting something like this. So every time I try to learn new things, it's like it strikes my mind. I just it doesn't work the same way. But here we have root, and then we start to develop the language, to develop words based on the root that we have. Lughat ad-dad. This is another thing that you know about the Arabic language. Languages, they are different when it comes to sounds and pronunciation. So, for example, native speakers of English, they have difficulties pronouncing the letter let's say Ayn, let's say Omar. Some people would start to train their vocal cords and be able to say Omar or Ali, but some will not. In some languages, people will not be able to produce the letter Kha. Kha. German people are they do it very well. But some other people will not be able to do it. Da, and it's different from da, like a D in English, because we have dal and we have da. When you see this letter alone, like this, or on a cover for a book or something, it means this book is about Arabic language. They call it the language of da, Lughat ad-dad. Lughatu ad-dad. Dad. So that dad is different. No other language had the same sound. So that's why it's called Lughat ad-dad, because no other language had the same sound. Do you know Arabic? Yes, you do. You do know some words. Can you look at these words do you recognize any words? All English words. Sugar. It comes from the Arabic word sukkar. Sukkar. It's an Arabic word. If you try to find any thing in English, if there is something to make it sugary, is there the verb in English? No, it's in Arabic, because the word is an Arabic word. Sukkar. To make some sukkar is sugar, and there's a verb to make something sweet and so on. So, what other words that you see? Chemistry, kimya, chemistry, kimya. This is an Arabic word. Algebra, al-jabr. This is an Arabic word. And then you have jabara, yajburu, ujbur, jabr. And every word has a root, and the root has a meaning, and the meaning would make sense when you understand what it means. But like, why algebra in English called algebra? Why? Is there a verb to algebra something? No? What other words? Alcohol. Alcohol, it's an Arabic word. You say alcohol, it is alcohol. It's an Arabic word. Camera. No one would think this comes from Arabic. I mean, like, come on. Camera is a new thing. You know, when they started the language, there was no cameras. Was there? No, there wasn't. So, and then you say it comes from Arabic. How come? Can anyone relate to this? Like the word camera? Here I'm you know, there's an allegation. I said this, the word camera it's an Arabic word, yes. Al-Qamar. What does it mean?
It's like the camera back then, it used to be like a small place.
You got a point. You got a point. You got a point. في اللغة العربية we have something called القمرة. القمرة with قاف. القمرة. And it means like a dark place. Like, you know, when you have like a very dark place and it's like, you know, it's closed from each side. This we call it in Arabic language al-qamara. And for people who cannot recognize this word, I'd say, you know, in Arabic countries, they bring bananas and they say, we put it like in Kamara, it's a place, it's a very dark place, and then when they put the bananas in this place, it thrives. Maqmoor. And when you cover a pot of tea and you say maqmoor because it's dark, you cover it and it's dark. How like like, you know, the science of photography started? It was like a dark room, and then the projection of the image, it used to make the photo. And this is how they brought the name camera. It comes from al-lugha al-arabiyya al-qamara. Al-qamara. The essence of the meaning itself. Why it's called... Oh, sorry. Yeah, came back. Can we... Okay, perfect. And then we have fi'l, qamara, yaqmuru, ukmur, qamr. Means covering things and, like, you know, putting them in the dark. So this is the word camera. But how come the Arabic language affected all other languages in this way? So, for example, some words you would see here, and when you search them, they say it came from like medieval Spanish. Go to medieval Spanish. How they made even the medieval Spanish, it came from Arabic, because Al-Andalus and Arabs, so at this time they were in Al-Andalus. So some of these words, the words that you see, they didn't come directly to English from Arabic, but like through other languages. Through other languages. The word laymoon, lemon. Lime, lima. لغة عربية.
Do you mean all this vocabulary comes from Arabic?
All these vocabulary, they come from Arabic.
Means.
Yeah. So as I said, because the sometimes the word it went to Spanish or Italian or other languages, and then they modified it, and then it came to English. So sometimes the word is like so clear to you, sometimes you have to follow like how the word came to English in this way. Sometimes you have to follow like the words in like different languages to understand how come. Like for example, soda. The word soda. Like why they call a soda? Or like even sodium. This is an Arabic word. How come? You know there is a word in Arabic called صداع. صداع. What is the meaning of صداع? Headache. It means headache. The plant that they get the substance, the chemical substance from, it's called soda. And why it's called like this? Because they used to use this substance for remedy. When you are having headaches, you use this substance to take it away. And then they use the substance, and then it came like sodium, and then any fuzzy drinks you will call like, soda drinks. So sometimes the word is not like directly you can understand how come it came from. Sometimes because it was a name of a plant in Arabic. Sometimes for like amber. What amber means? You know this like scent of like lamb. Why do they call it? Because the plant in Arabic it's called this fragrance in Arabic is called amber. Amber. And then they took it and say, because they don't have ayn, so they used to pronounce it amber, and then the noon and the meme, the m, and the ba are close to amber. People who study tajweed, and they know like iqlab, mim ba'd, so the meme and ba are close to each other, so amber, and then amber. Excuse me? البرتقالي. Sometimes they call it like this because it looks like it has the same color of the thing. So if you go and the word syrup, if you search it will come from the word jirab. I think it's like in Spanish, and then the word jirab, it came from the Arabic word sharab. What do you do with a syrup? Do you eat it or drink it? If there is a verb in English called to syrup something, no, but sharab in Arabic, shariba, yashrabu, sharib, wa sharab. So the word syrup comes from jirab, which was sharab, the Arab. So how come all these things came to other languages like Spanish and English and even German and Italian? If you go like to the Wikipedia and you say like search for like list of like borrowed words from Arabic into English, you would find not one lists of like words. Lists of the words. But as I said, the language was preserved because they have a root. So we understand why we call a syrup, why we call it sharab. Because it comes from al-fi'l shariba. And so on. For each word in the language, it is so systematic and beautiful. It is so systematic and beautiful. And that's why Arabs used to be so proud of the language. And people who used to rule at all times, they used to appreciate the language the most. So poets were the closest to the rulers. Poets were the closest to the rulers. And people used like making poetry was the biggest industry. It was the biggest industry. People used Arabs were so proud, so they put they will tell stories in poetry. They'll use the language to play with words. Because as I said, they have the root, so they play with words. So you would read one line, and then it all looks the same, but it's all different because of tashkil, because of the vowels. So they mastered the language, and they played with the language, and they were able to judge it because they knew it, and there is a system that governs the language. So no one would come and bring words in the language or invent something or say this is true or not true based on like just philosophy. No, there is a system. You said this because it means that, and grammatically it should be with like this vowel or that vowel and so on. And then one of like, the lines of poetry that like people used to like and Arabs used to like, I always tell them they're, if you know Al-Mutanabbi, when Al-Mutanabbi is like a very famous poet, a very famous poet. He used to play with words, and people used to say like even Arabs, native speakers, they just say like, how do you come up with like these words? So they used like to say like lines of poetry about like, pride. So like, some of the lines, this not from Al-Mutanabbi, like Arabs, they used to say, for example, وَنَشْرَبُ إِنْ وَرَدْنَا الْمَاءَ صَفْوًا وَيَشْرَبُ غَيْرُنَا كَدْرًا وَطِينًا. So they're so proud of themselves, they say like, if we find like some like clean and clear water, we drink. But other people, they drink mud and dirt. Because at this time, water was like so, like it was like a treasure. Because it was desert. The lines of poetry that says, الخيل والليل والبيداء تعرفني والسيف والقرطاس والرمح والقلم. So والسيف, what does it mean? What does it mean? What are a word al-khayl? What does it mean في اللغة العربية? Horses. والليل, night. والبيداء, desert. الصحراء. تعرفني. Why would this be like so big that they know him? Because people used to fear these things. Because a horse would represent war, and al-layl, darkness, when you can't do anything. والبيداء, desert, you get lost. تعرفني. So all these things that people fear, they know him. Yeah, they are friends. Or even, and even they're not friends. If he said they are friends, that won't be so eloquent as they say they know him. Because when they say they know him, it means that he doesn't know them. They are not friends. They know him because they fear him. You know the people whom you fear. But it won't go the other way. تعرفني. And then when you talk about the sword and qirtas and like, books about ilm, so knowledge and like, war and a spear, a rim, it represents war too. And so all the things that represents power, they know him. And then in another line he said, أنا الذي نظر الأعمى إلى أدبي وأسمعت كلماتي من به صمم. And الذي نظر الأعمى إلى, I am the one whom the blind looked at his poetry, at his literature. It was so beautiful and nice that the blind was able to see it. وأسمعت كلماتي من به صمم. And my words, they made the deaf hear it. وأسمعت كلماتي من به صمم. And in another line, أنام ويسهر الخلق جراها ويختصم. So when he goes to bed, he just closes his eyes and enjoys sleeping. And he never thinks about the language and all the odds about it and the things that people do not know. ويسهر الخلق. But the rest of of the people, they stay up late talking about the words that he produced during daytime. And they they quarrel with each other and they debate and say, no, he meant this and he meant that. And then when they ask the person, when they ask him, how come you produce such literature? How come you can come up with all those like imageries and like similes and like, how come? What did he reply? He replied saying what? I can see some of my students here be like, they're in trouble. What did he say?
English, Arabic.
I'd accept it in English. It will be like half punishment.
I just thought.
Yeah, he said, والله ما قلت الشعر إلا لأني أردت أن أقول كلاما. I didn't say poetry. I do not I do not make it. I just talk. So this is the language. This is going back to the headline, the title. Why Arabic? Because it is very systematic. Very systematic. There is a system that governs the language. Always there are some exceptions, but there is a system. You have the root and then you can produce different words using one root. It is very systematic. It is very miraculous, and we talked about this part when we talked about ظلمات بعضها فوق بعض في القرآن إذا أخرج يده لم يكد يراها. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala at the beginning of the verse he said, talking about موج فوقه موج من فوقه موج من فوقه سحاب, and then it's like, you know what causes the darkness is the waves above waves, and then the sahab from above them. So it's miraculous how it's so precise describing things. مرج البحرين يلتقيان بينهما برزخ. There is something that separates them, yes?
Just come back to the title. Why Arabic? Why Arabic? What's the rest of the sentence? For Quran or for to learn or?
No, I mean why Arabic? Why the language? Why it's like so, why we are so proud of it? Why Arabic? I mean, this is one point to clarify that Quran came using the language that people knew at this time. But the language existed thousands and thousands of years before the message of Islam. And it came simple, but at the same time, complex. As I said, simplicity and complexity together, So it is miraculous. It is so systematic. It is so systematic. It is a poetic language. When you listen, when I read or analyze any English poem, I try to make sense of it. I mean sometimes there are some similes or things that you feel nice, but I read them. And there are some poems that are translated in Arabic, and I read the Arabic version, and I understand the English version very well. And I read the Arabic version and I say, Allah, subhanAllah, the Arabic version, it's more expressive than the English one, and this is the original. This is just a translation. This is just a translation. And you feel it's if I translate it back, it's going to produce a better version of the English poem that was the original text. This is because the words in Arabic, so many words. For each word there are so many synonyms, and each synonym. So in Arabic, I may write a whole story without saying very and few and little, try to give degrees to things, to adjectives, to numbers. I can write the whole story using words that would give one meaning but in different degrees. But in other languages, you have to use very little, much, few, many. No? In Arabic, you have a word for each degree. So this is what I mean by why Arabic language? Why the language? If you have a system and if you have a root, and then you study the system, then you can produce all other words using the scale, the system, and the root that you have. People would think because of the system, it makes it tough. Because when they learn other languages, they just memorize vocabulary, memorize vocabulary, memorize vocabulary. But I mean always, to put a system, it takes time. But then when it starts to work, everything just flows by. You know, some people would like to write their notes down. Some other people would like to put them in their smartphones. Other people say, you know, it's just quick to write it down. If you put it in a smartphone and then it's like connected to your laptop, and whenever you go you can bring it back and edit it, and then it's all over, like it's like in the cloud. It takes time, but at the same time it saves the time in the long run. So this is the same thing. If we are making, you know, a comparison here, there is a system, it takes time to implement, but once it's there, it is installed, then quickly you can put anything in the system and get the outcome. This video, this is just to tell you why when I talk about the language, I said different other languages, they borrowed from Arabic. Why? Why did they borrow from Arabic language? Why? Because at this time, it was the time when the Arabs, they were in like, you know, on top of the world, they were leading everything. They led everything at this time. So signs and everything at this time, it was done by Arab. So they had no other way but take some words from the language to be able to understand it. Let's take the thing out.
Did your era have on the modern world? So Sarah, your group has the ancient Greeks. Ravi, you've got the Romans. And Danny's group gets, yes, a bit of a challenge here. You get the Middle Ages. Some even call it the Dark Ages. Boring. See how you get on.
Dark Ages can have anything to do with us.
Excuse me. Sorry to bother you.
What do you want?
We need to find out what impact the Dark Ages had on the modern world.
Never was a period of history so poorly named. Don't touch. And I suppose someone's been filling your head with the usual nonsense, eh? 1,000 wasted years. A black hole in history, am I right?
Yeah, sort of.
See, it's always the same. You assume it was all mud, disease, death and destruction, with marauding mobs of barbarians ripping down the good of former civilizations, burning and plundering as they went, nothing of any worth invented either, eh? Half of that. No. Go on with your food.
Sorry to bother you.
Come on, it's probably not worth it. Everyone knows that the Greeks and Romans invented everything anyway.
Oh, did they now? You're sure about that, are you? You know, I might just have something for you. You seem to be up for the task. I suppose I could. Follow me. I've got just the book for you.
Where are we going? I don't know. Ask him.
Excuse me. Where are we going? From darkness into light, my young friend. From ocean onto land. There are things you should know. Oh, yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. Now, oh, I left it around here somewhere. Ah, here it is. Now, take a look. If you dare.
What's going on?
Welcome to the Dark Ages, or as it should be known, as the Golden Ages.
Who are you?
I am Al-Jazari, engineer and ingenious inventor.
I thought you said this was Dark Ages. It doesn't look very dark.
That's because it's all a matter of perspective, my soon-to-be illuminating friend. Of course, there are parts of the world that weren't dark at all, but in the civilization that stretched from Spain to China, the golden rays of discovery and invention shone over everything.
What civilization?
The Muslim civilization, my young friend. Through scholars and scientists of various faiths, some of the most important discoveries known to man made at this time. Discoveries that drew on knowledge of the ancients, but have more connections with your modern world than you could possibly ever imagine.
The CTO is trying to get you excited about it.
Like what?
Well, all sorts of things.
I've got to get a picture of this.
I knew it was a good idea.
Who are you?
Allow me to introduce Ibn al-Haytham, a great scientist whose ideas led to the invention of the camera.
You invented the camera.
I laid the foundations for modern cameras by explaining how our eyes work. I found a way of projecting an image onto another surface through a small hole in a dark room.
And this is what we call al-qamara. That's why the word camera came.
Think of all the things that evolved from this discovery. Cameras, cinema, all share the same principle. Cool. Look up below!
Who's that?
That's my good friend, Abbas ibn Farnas, who gazed up to the heavens, passionate in his belief that man could fly.
Whoa.
Indeed, he dared to dream about flying 1,000 years before the Wright brothers. Do you know you all take your jet-setting holidays for granted, so it only seems fair to remember Abbas ibn Farnas.
Okay, while it loads, do you have any questions? Because we're like wrapping this up. Any questions? Yes, please.
I heard that lecture once the Sheikh Mustafa was saying that Arabic was the first language. The first language in history. Is that correct?
Yeah, like who was talking about the scholar who wrote the book Asl al-Lughat. And she proved that Arabic was like, but the thing is that I read about this, but we cannot say for sure it is the origin of all languages, because what happened at this old ages, there are no records that will prove which one started and how the language developed. So all they know about the Arabic language or any other languages are when they started to write down about the language and to write the system. So people from this time, maybe few thousand years ago, they started to put history to the language, but it existed a long time before this. But this scholar, like the Dr. Mustafa Mahmoud was talking about, what she has done, she tried to explore, so let's say, people would say this language existed before this language. So she started to examine some of the meanings that existed in this language and tried to relate it to Arabic to see that they borrowed from the language. And to say this language existed before and this language, when it started to build itself up, they needed some word to make a complete system. So they borrowed from the Arabic language. So the scholar that Dr. Mustafa Mahmoud was talking about, she did this. But we cannot say for sure that this happened, because it's not like all linguists, they agreed upon this. But it's one of the very, very, very oldest languages. Any other questions? Yes?
One of the first written languages.
Again, we cannot say this because in other language, even اللغة الهيروغليفية, hieroglyphic languages that fairies used to write, they found some written and it dates back to 10,000 years ago. So they were not able to confirm that it was the first written language. Because other language, even if they didn't have some writing on the papers or the things, they used to carve on the stones, even few symbols. So again, I cannot say that it is and no one can. If you read about this, they would say that the history about this is not so clear that you can make a judgment about which started first. You can say, okay, it came from this group and this group came from this group. But how they developed and which one was written before the other, they cannot determine this for sure. Other questions? Time, so just a few minutes.
You did forget one thing.
He forgot about the tail. This is the first, trial for flying. So he made wings, but he forgot about the tail. So
Many call me the father of surgery.
Did you actually use surgery back then?
In fact, many of the surgical tools that I invented are still used in your modern hospitals. Please, the patient needs my attention. Scalpel? In that case, I'll use catgut.
Catgut?
From the gut of animals. Perfect for stitching up internal wounds. The surgeons are still using it today. Sorry, mustache.
Who's she?
That's Mariam Astrolabi, one of the many brilliant women of the time. She made sophisticated astrolabes. Astrolabes. They show the sky and the stars on a small flat plate you can hold in your hand. Think of them as ancient calculating or timekeeping devices. Today you have your watch, compass, satellite navigation, helping people and explorers travel the world. Science is brilliant.
All these things were developed during the golden ages.
That's just the tip of the iceberg. There were thousands of other inventions covering all areas of life, and in the years that followed, their influence spread across across the whole of medieval Europe, so you see, it wasn't so dark after all.
What about you?
Me?
What did you invent?
Well, I don't want to be big-headed, but I made some groundbreaking advances in engineering. I suppose my significant discovery converted rotary motion into linear motion using a crank and connecting parts, essentially pumps and engines. In fact, I've no idea how the industrial solution could have happened hundreds of years later without such a device. Not that I have my crown glory was my amazing time television, my legendary 11 clock.
It's a clock.
Yes. Dozens of components collected from different cultures around the world. Indian, Greek.
Just because we are running out of time, so I'm going to stop this, and you can find it on YouTube under the name of like 1001 Inventions, or like the Golden Ages. The point that I was trying to make is that they borrowed some of the Arabic words because the inventions at this time were done by Arabs. So they described it in Arabic words. The mechanism, how they work, the name of the tool, the machine, everything, they're in Arabic. So they used to borrow the Arabic words, and then some modification happened to the language. Like, for example, algorithms, when it comes to like, mathematics, they're after like Al-Khwarizmi, but then they started like the G, it was like supposed to be Kha, and so on. If you search the language, you understand, like, it's like a sea. You just need to start sailing, in the sea. So because of like the invention, the Dark Ages, when you read history and they talk about the Dark Ages and like, how at this time there was like poverty and like, and like epidemic sickness and people were like dying, and there were like Dark Ages. At this time, there were like the Golden Ages for Muslims. The first hospital was in Damascus, in Syria, in Damascus, and 150 years after this hospital was established, the first hospital was established in Europe. After 150 years. At this time, when someone used to get sick and any symptoms like on the skin like black or like red or something, they used to execute the person and say that he is cursed. 150 years before this, Arabs and Muslims, they used to heal people, and they had hospitals, they had surgeons, they had civilization, they have golden ages. But the thing is that, as he said at the beginning of the video, it's a matter of perspective. You look at it as Dark Ages from your perspective, because at this time you didn't have anything. But from our perspective, those ages were the golden ages, when we had the science, the knowledge, the technology, the language, everything. So people had to learn from us, then they had to learn our language. And this is why Arabic. Because Arabic, when you learn the language, and when you do anything with the language, when you invent, when you produce, when you do anything, and people try to learn from you, then they have to understand your language to be able to receive your knowledge. And this is why Arabic. جزاكم الله خيرا. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.